Ever since I started making video games, I've always done 2D games. They've always seemed very simple to make. I've been mainly intimidated by 3D games because it's literally a whole other dimension. 2D games are simple, right? If there's physics, it just things go down. If we're talking about physics games, right? Things in code that is just move to the left, to move to the right, or up and down are just pretty simple. But also adding move forwards and backwards, that seems way too much for me. Another thing that has made me a 2D game developer is that drawing in 2D has been way too simple for the longest time. Ever since you're a kid, you learn how to draw, but doing 3D things, well, I guess clay exists and Play-Doh, but you know what I mean. It's a whole different skill set. I've used Blender a couple of times before, but the results have been mixed. With all the excuses I gave myself all these couple of years, I think it was finally time to create a 3D game.
The whole idea of this experiment is pretty simple. Just create a playable 3D game. It doesn't even have to be that good, and that's pretty normal for my games, but the game has to be at least playable, and it shouldn't look that unfinished. An idea I had in the drawer for a couple of months now has been a throw rocks at people simulator. So the point of the game is just to throw rocks at specific people depending on different descriptions, and accumulate points. This idea is pretty simple, there's not much to it, so I couldn't make a game that lasts hours with this. So something I do with small ideas like this is maybe create an incremental game, a numbers go up game. So in this case, the idea would be just to accumulate points and eventually buy the hardest, heaviest rock possible.
The idea for the characters are these are gonna be like Stone Age people. So like maybe exiting the Neolithic and starting to get like a bit of bronze tools, so they're gonna be like cavemen-like people. These are gonna be very simple characters. Huge head, huge eyes, huge everything. I tried making it a bit more simple, but it ended up looking just like an Among Us person, so I just came back to the normal caveman character. These people are gonna have different things that are gonna differentiate themselves from each other, like hair type, beard, jewelry maybe, and even weapons. This is so later we can tell the player you have to hit everyone with a certain type of clothing, and yeah, they're gonna be on top of a chariot, one of those old chariot-like vehicles. I've seen this before, right? Two guys on top of a chariot riding two horses instead of just mounting the horses, and I didn't really know why they didn't just sit on top of the horses for the longest time, right? But apparently, horses were not that strong to carry a person like that until they bred them long enough for it to happen. So now you know. Now it was finally time to create them in Blender. So I followed a few tutorials on YouTube, especially the one that looks kind of like my character, and I got to work. Everything seemed fine, and to be honest, like I had some experience in Blender, like at least I knew kind of how to move around and everything. But doing people is something different. As you can see, I struggle a lot doing the hair, and there were tutorials about how to do the hair, but I really couldn't get it going. I ended up with a few styles that I think are Bronze Age type hairstyles. They look pretty awful right now in Blender, but I thought to myself once I got it in Godot and I painted it different colors, it was going to look like actual hair. I created some final details like the clothing and stuff, and it was now time to open Godot. Godot is the game engine I decided to use for this. It's the game engine I use for 2D, and I know there's better stuff to do 3D with, like Unreal Engine, but I'm just gonna learn one thing at a time, and I think going from 2D in Godot to 3D in Godot is an easier transition. To be honest, it wasn't as different as I expected it to be. In Godot, there's these things called 2D nodes, well, node 2Ds, and basically I just replaced them with nodes 3D. They're basically the same thing, just that in code you also have to worry about the other spatial axis. Another thing that was important was creating an environment and lighting. In 2D, it's basically just a drawing, even while developing inside game engines. But in 3D, of course there can be lighting in 2D. That's not an non-existent concept in 2D. But if you've worked before in 2D, you know it's more of a stickers in a notebook situation than a whole movie production thing. You have to worry more about things like cameras, lighting, and lots of other stuff that may not be as necessary in 2D. After I got movement to work, even if it's a bit buggy, I could move on to the next thing, which was animation.
I really want to eventually learn everything that has to do with 3D stuff, but for the time being I really can't find the time to learn proper animation. I really in the future want to learn everything, like even motion capture stuff, but for now I'm just gonna go with the simple solution for people like me, and that's basically to use a tool called Mixamo.
Which is a place that has already a lot of animations, and you can just basically drag and drop it into your model. For some reason it wasn't working, and I didn't even know why. I even followed some tutorials to rig my own stuff, but it didn't help at all. Then I suddenly remembered that this is not what a human looks like, especially the arms. The arms were way too low and way too short. So I just thought of just making the arms stupidly long just to see if that will fix the error, and it did. After that worked, I just knew I just needed to fix it up and it'll work just fine. Still, there are a lot of other alternatives for Mixamo, but the others weren't as good in my opinion, and some were not free. So I think in the future I will just do it myself and learn animation or work with a team instead of just working alone. But anyway, after I got that to work, it was time to go back to Godot. For some reason at this point, I thought that it looked way too boring, and I know there's not a lot of things going on here. I thought like a good way to maybe make it more interesting is to make this like a sphere instead of just a flat surface. I think this would also make more use of the vertical space in this screen, because this game is basically just throwing rocks at people. There's no jumping, there's no nothing, so just moving side to side can be a bit boring. And by making it a sphere, you can see in the periphery more of the world and more people, and it makes it look more interesting. I don't know, I thought it was the case. I was pretty happy with the results, and the lighting made it look very good, like if it was like an actual planet. So it was time to finally add the rock throwing to the game. After fixing a few bugs like this weird Coriolis effect thing, and adding the Mixamo animations and randomizing the appearances of the citizens of the world, everything continued to just fit in together. The next step was making this whole world look like an actual planet. There are a lot of textures on the internet that can help you basically map a 2D image into a sphere, but if you know anything about the whole map projection problem, the problem is that you can't use a 2D thing to represent the surface of a 3D object like a sphere without stretching it. That's why when looking at a map, things near the poles look way bigger than things in the equator, even if they're not, and I had the exact same problem. I downloaded, for example, this texture of Mars and placed it on my planet, but it looked way too stretched at the poles. The rest of the planet was fine, I guess, but I really couldn't get over how ugly it looked in the poles. I even tried with some higher resolution images, but I wasn't really that happy with it. So I just decided to go without a texture. At this point, I decided to add some details like trees that I found on Polypizza, and it makes the world feel more alive. At this point, I finally added the important stuff, which was hurting people. By actually adding pain to these people, you could see it was actually turning into a game. I could also test things like their scared animations and their dying animations. Some animations didn't look as good. For example, this one takes too long to die, but it's kinda charming, so I just left it in. At this point of the development, I realized something. I was taking way too much time developing this game.
I know frustration is part of the learning process and it's totally normal, but at this point this was a quick weekend project and it was turning into a weeks-long project that was a game about just throwing rocks at people. So this was time to just scope down the game a bit. So instead of making it an incremental game, I was just gonna give the player every rock they wanted, so there was no final rock to unlock. They was gonna turn the game into a toy basically, because there's no final goal or something. But I think it kind of works as a demo, and at least I'm gonna finish it, because if I just went with the incremental stuff, I think I would have given up on it.
Anyway, it was finally time to create the actual rocks for the game. So I was gonna add 4 rocks, each with an appropriate amount of damage they're gonna cause. For the softest rock, I got inspired by this rock I got from a local volcano, legally of course. Don't take rock from places that explicitly say it's rude or illegal to, because if we all take rocks from the local volcano, there's gonna be no local volcano left for us to enjoy. This rock is very light and has like a lot of bubbles, and I think it's like pumice, but I think pumice is lighter, but yeah, I was gonna make it work some way. So I followed a YouTube tutorial on how to make rocks, and it was pretty easy. By painting the first rock, I realized that it didn't really look like the rock I had, but it looked very rocky, so I decided to keep it. I think this rock is more like a normal default rock you find in the ground, and I think that's granite, so granite is gonna be the third rock in terms of hardness in the game. It unfortunately had a lot of polygons, and that's very bad for video games, but I kinda fixed it in a way you're not supposed to, because it's bad topology. That's what I heard from 3D people, but it's not like the rock is gonna have muscles or anything, so I think it's good enough. It worked pretty fine in the game, so it was now time to work on the actual softest rock. At this point I wanted to look up references for volcanic rocks like pumice. Pumice is more like a round and very lightly colored stone, so in the end I didn't really use the volcanic rock I had at home, so that was pretty useless. So now it was time to create the hardest rock. For this one, I decided to use a tungsten cube. I know the internet right now is like deciding whether it likes or hates tungsten cubes, but I think it's a good example for me to learn some stuff, like making things metallic. this was the easiest rock to make. Well, it's not like the others were hard, right? But it's just a cube. Another rock I added was obsidian. I know in Minecraft it's one of the hardest things, but in real life it's just like glass, it's very brittle. But I think it can fuck you up quite a bit, at least more than pumice, so it's gonna fit right in. I don't know, if you throw 6 pumice stones at somebody, they're gonna die. And if you throw 3 obsidian stones to somebody, they're gonna die in real life. But it's okay. I think people will get the idea. Now it was time to add some final details, like the chariot that for some reason I just decided to model on Blender, and other 3D stuff that was just gonna make the game a bit prettier. At this point, I was really enjoying the Blender experience. Creating the wheels and the chariot especially was very fun to do. It took a lot of time, but I really enjoyed it. I finalized some details on the main character by getting him one of those old German type hats, so you know he's a bad guy, even though it doesn't fit with the era, but I think it looks pretty good. At this point in the game engine, I played around with a ton of different other stuff that I didn't before in my developer experience, like viewports and animations in 3D and cameras and a lot of other stuff, and everything was looking pretty good. I haven't talked a lot about the code here, and this channel really doesn't really go into that, but it was a pleasant experience to know that there wasn't much difference at all. A third dimension really doesn't do much, to be honest. I think Godot is especially very good at this because basically every 2D node has an equivalent in 3D, so it's basically the same functions and everything, so it really wasn't that bad. After finalizing the details and fixing some bugs, the game was finally done. So what did I learn? Will I now make only 3D games? Will I now become a 3D modeler? I think I'm kinda gonna stick with 2D for now, even though I really enjoyed the process. I think the issue isn't really that I found it difficult. I think it's the amount of time that I will have to dedicate for this. I would say like 90% of the time used to develop this game was doing stuff on Blender. And I know a lot of this is just because I'm just starting out with this, but even once I got the hang of it, it really took a lot of time. And to be honest, the results are not something that I will be that proud of anyway.
I do think in the future I do want to get involved with more 3D games, but I really can't do it alone right now. Things are more enjoyable anyway when you're with a team. There's also a lot of people that of course have way more experience than me in this sort of situation.
Part of my disappointment with this whole process was in the middle of making it, when I realized that it was taking way too much time, and that was just one extra skill in game development. This game doesn't have any sound. It doesn't have sound effects, music, it doesn't really have levels, so there's a lot that is missing here. And I think with my current skills and time, I would rather dedicate time and effort to those other skills. But this whole experiment was very good for me anyway, and I think that everybody that is just a developer, just a coder, and wants to get into game development has to try it at least once. This is because the things you're gonna learn are gonna be things like what is going in and out of 3D software, how materials work, how bones and other stuff work. This is very important for developers so the knowledge gap becomes smaller and you can work way better in the future with 3D artists. The same way I believe 3D artists would get a lot from making a game at least once. By knowing what the others have to go through, you make work easier for everybody in the team. And maybe you discover something you like. Like I just found out that I enjoy making 3D stuff. But anyway, the game is now on itch.io, so go try it out. Again, it's not like a game you can finish. I added some parameters that the player can tweak so they can play around with it. But yeah, the game is pretty simple, as you could see. So try it out. Anyway, if you enjoy this sort of experiments, remember to subscribe and like this video, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.